Hello, everyone. Welcome back for our third discussion on human-centered design. This is Rowan Doherty from ThinkPlace, who's talking about what is HCD and how is it different from code design. And we want to thank him for spending time with us. If you have questions, please post them on the Springboard discussion page. And as we note on the discussion page, if you cannot see this video on the discussion page, which many people can't, then there is a YouTube link on that page. So Rowan, thank you in advance and take it away.
Great. Well, hi, my name is Rowan Doherty. I'm the studio lead at ThinkAction in Washington, DC. I've been working with ThinkPlace, which is the global association with ThinkAction. I've been working with ThinkPlace for about 4 years now. Before that, my background was in industrial design and business innovation, I guess you could call it. So I've sort of been in the design field for a few years now, in sort of both an academic sense and a professional sense. And I guess in that time, I've sort of come across the terms human-centered design, design thinking, and co-design a lot. I've heard them used almost interchangeably, and in recent years, it's become almost a buzzword in some circles, in some sort of businesses and industries. And I think basically it's because they are all very, very closely related. I have a bit of a way that I think about the three concepts, and I think that they are different, and they do have different characteristics and benefits. And yeah, so I guess this presentation, this discussion is about the differences between them and how they relate to each other. So feel free to ask questions throughout this talk. I'd probably prefer to answer questions as they come up rather than waiting till I'm finished talking. But at any rate, I'll switch over to my presentation now. And yeah, we'll go through that. So human-centered design, co-design, and design thinking, what's the difference? So I've got a really simple model that I don't think is official. I don't think this is something you'd find if you search the terms on the internet, but this is how I think about it, and this is how I've been teaching it the past few years, and I've found that it's been quite resilient, really, in the ways that I've been practicing design anyway. So to start with, I guess I've got a few definitions here about these terms. Co-design is essentially a tool that we can use in a complex challenge where there's no single expert who understands the whole multifaceted problem. So co-design actively engages multiple and diverse perspectives in the design process to ensure that the end result is suitable and viable to those people who are involved in the challenge. So it's basically bringing together those voices that are involved in a challenge so that they are heard, and I think so that they're constructively heard as well. It's not just giving lip service to people and saying we included them in a focus group, therefore it's co-design. It's actually giving them an opportunity to really participate in the process. Speaking of process, then, human-centered design I think of as the process that we follow throughout a design process or design approach. So it's a problem-solving approach at heart, and as the name suggests, it's inherently human-centered. So it's going through solving a problem, but really focusing on the human elements of that problem every step of the way. So human-centered design bases decisions on a deep understanding of people's experiences and lives and attitudes, perspectives, behaviors. And to do that that's why co-design and human-centered design are always very closely linked. Getting those people into the room and actually working with people who are involved in the challenge is a really good way to understand at a deep level those experiences and to understand those people. Other ways we might understand or create this understanding is through interviews, through qualitative research, and there's a whole lot of ways that we can do qualitative research in a human-centered approach. Design thinking then is the mindset that's adopted by a designer, and I'll go through some models about to exactly explain what this is, but design thinking really is looking at what's desirable for people, what's viable in a technology sense, like what can we actually create with the resources we have, and then what's possible in a business sense. So what can we actually do sustainably into the future that create an impact. Design thinking is also looking at, it's also a very, we use a model that's sort of convergent or divergent and convergent, which again, I'll go into it a bit later, but it's essentially taking an empathetic view to begin with of the world. It's trying to understand almost everything about a challenge and not being too worried about going too broad at the start of the project. So it's really allowing a project team or a designer throughout the HCD process. It's allowing them to think broadly about a problem and really explore every sort of avenue or every facet of a problem. And then it's taking a more convergent look at those at the problem. Oh, sorry. It's taking a more convergent look at the problem and trying to drill down into what's an actual solution that we can create here, or we can implement. Design thinking is also experimental, which I think is a really important part of it. So it's you could think of it as like a trial and error mindset, where we're going to try as many things as possible, and many of them might not work, but we actually can still learn a lot from that. It's being quite comfortable with failure and acknowledging that you can actually learn a lot through failure. So those are quite a high level description of these three terms. But essentially, the reason that we do all of this is to create innovation or to innovate. And David Ireland, who's just been talking in the past hour, he's really talked about the role of innovation in design. And I think I'm not going to touch too much on that. But really, I define innovation as a new perspective, or a combination of new perspective and transformation ideas that lead to action. So this transformation ideas that can be executed in a way that creates value for people, or a community, or a country, or a society. So to just really sum that up, co-design is one of the tools that we might use in a human-centered design approach, which is the process that we would follow in a design project. And design thinking is the mindset that really sits underneath all of that. So it's the mindset that a designer adopts to be able to achieve, or to be able to go through a human-centered design approach and to action co-design tools. And ultimately, we do all of that with the objective of creating an innovative solution or an innovative result. So I've used this model for the last few years, and it's sort of the simplest way I can explain how these concepts fit together. It's definitely something that is not set in stone. I think it could be a topic for discussion. Some people might dispute how I've represented it here. And I think that's fine. A really big principle of design approach is that it's flexible. And I think it's very adaptable to the context and the project. And because of that, you might be able to argue that these three these three topics, themes might relate to each other in a different way. Yeah, and it creates some constructive conversation. But this is how I like to represent it. So for each of these three sort of topics here, or these three things, I want to go through some, I guess, a little bit of theory, and some tools and models. Probably more so models than tools, but models that illustrate how we think about what co-design is, what human-centered design is, and what design thinking is. So I think I've got about 3 models for each of these that maybe will help explain the difference. But ultimately, I think it's, if you keep in mind that the co-design is a tool, human-centered design is a process, and design thinking is a mindset. I think that'll help to clarify that sort of discussion, and hopefully help to not mix the terms up or use them interchangeably. So if we start with co-design, co-design actually fits on a spectrum of engagement. So you could think of it as an engagement tool that you might use in a design approach. So as I said before, co-design is not just bringing people into a room and saying, we've talked with them, we've included them in a focus group, therefore it is co-design. That might be more of, at the bottom end of this spectrum, informing people what you're going to be doing, or consulting them. So, acknowledging what they think, but not necessarily including them in the process. Collaboration then is the next step. The sort of idea there is that we'll work with you to make sure what your needs and requirements are reflected in the outcome. But co-design takes that one step further to really say that you're actually going to become a partner in this project. You're going to become part of the team that is working towards creating a solution here. It is one step below empowerment or empowering, though, and empowering is really just taking a step back and saying, well, here's your problem. It involves you, so you figure it out. Empowering. So really, all of these stages of the spectrum have their place. I think in a design process, we're really working with complex challenges, and challenges that aren't going to be solved in a simple conversation, and really require us to dig a bit deeper. And because of that, empowering people to solve it themselves might not work. You really need that expertise as well to help them. But at the same time, just informing people or consulting them on what they think might not be getting their involvement, might not be getting enough of their involvement or enough of their participation. So co-design is a sort of sits on this spectrum, and I think it really lends itself to the design process where we bring people in to actively participate in the process. The next model that I want to talk about with co-design is one that this is an original ThinkPlace IP. I think this was created in ThinkPlace about 10 years ago, and we actually use this for all of our projects. Basically, we say that to use co-design in a project, you need to have 4 voices present. And this helps us think about, well, how do we actually do co-design? So first of all, you've got the voice of intent. And this is generally your project sponsor or your funding body, for example, who really has the high-level view and high-level objectives for the project. They might be setting the scope and really the high-level outcomes that they want to see achieved through this project. Obviously, I think it's quite important to have them involved in throughout the work. Opposite the voice of intent, there at the bottom of this model is the voice of expertise, who clearly is your expert. So that might be your subject matter experts, like your Ministry of Health, for example, if it's a social health problem that you're trying to solve. The people who know a lot about the subject matter that you're dealing with, people who are professionals in that field. I think having that expertise to inject into the project is really necessary, so that you're not doing work that's already, or doing thinking that's already been done before. The voice of experience is your users. They're the people who are experiencing the problem or the challenge at face value, on the ground. This might be, people, community members, depending what the project is. It might be workers, or people who are ultimately going to be affected by whatever solution you're creating. And then finally is the voice of design, and that's your designer. And so the designer's role actually is not to, as well as helping design the solution and really bringing that expertise on how to go through the design process. The designer's role is actually to facilitate the other voices and to make sure that the voice of intent does not sort of flatten out the voice of experience, which might, for example, excuse me, the voice of experience might, for example, contradict what the voice of intent thought was the problem to begin with. It's really the voice of the designer here is really trying to facilitate an active and constructive participation from each of the other voices. But it's also, I think it's sometimes we fall into the trap of where the voice of designer just becomes a facilitator. And I think it's important to remember that designer has a unique set of skills as well in being bringing that creative perspective, and and really helping come up with new solutions or new problems that might not have been thought of before. So the designer's role is, I think, quite important here. As well as everyone else. I think if you actually miss any of these four voices in a project, if they're not actively participating throughout the project, you really risk setting yourself up for failure, or risk creating a solution that actually is not going to work or not be viable. Excuse me. So the last bit I want to say about co-design is, I guess then what are the advantages of co-design? So there's three advantages here. There's a bit of a typo on that slide. Sorry. First of all, it works in many contexts. So we use co-design in international development projects, as well as designing a new layout for a client's office, for example, or something as small as that. So co-design, really getting that active participation from those four voices is really applicable at so many different levels and in so many different contexts. It's also very flexible. So like I mentioned, it's quite scalable. You could use it to solve small challenges that you're facing within a team, and at the same time you could scale it up to be used to solve national or international challenges. It's flexible. It's flexible because it can be used, in this in these different ways. And I think like the design approach, and like I sort of mentioned before, it's not a sort of rigid, fixed, this is how you do co-design. I think you need to have that flexibility to account for differences in culture, differences in approach, differences in people as well. So the best way to do co-design is however the project team thinks the best way to get active participation from the people that need to be involved. There's there's not really a set best only or single way to do it. I think is what I'm trying to say here. But ultimately, the advantage of co-design is that it empowers the people who are involved in the challenge, and this is really quite powerful, and I think a powerful characteristic of this tool. And a lot of problem-solving approaches, or traditional problem-solving sense, you might have a group of experts come together to try and solve a challenge, and then push that out into the world. And what that means is that the people who ultimately will be affected by this new solution or intervention actually don't have an active say in creating that solution. And I would say that our experience in many contexts is that people really appreciate being given the opportunity to be involved in helping design a solution. So I'll continue on. The next sort of few models that I want to talk about are around human-centered design. So, like I said before, human-centered design you can think of as a process. Again, it's very flexible, and again, you might find people, some organizations or some people might talk about human-centered design in different ways. I find that generally, it comes down to these sort of 5 stages. But I think it's important to note that you might not go through these stages in a linear fashion, and you might find that you get so far and then you've actually got to go back and repeat a previous stage because you've learned something new that you didn't know before. So to give a quick overview of these 5 stages in a human-centered design approach, you start with an intent, so that's setting the scope of the project. Again, it's really beneficial to set to do this intent stage with your 4 voices of design, to make sure that everyone's on board with what this project is, with the direction this project's going, or the direction that you're proposing. You'll solve a challenge. Then we'll go into a discovery phase, which is, I guess you could think of as research. So generally, this is qualitative research, because we're dealing with people, humans, in this approach, as the name implies. It is inherently qualitative. You can describe sort of a context through numbers and qualitative studies, but the real richness in a human experience is very hard to understand through numbers and statistics. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to use a sort of to use qualitative and quantitative research in collaboration for human-centered design, where one sort of reinforces the other, and that can be quite powerful. But I think really in a traditional human-centered design approach, we're really thinking about qualitative research, and this might look like interviews or focus groups or immersive research, like living with people for a period of time, that sort of thing. In the discovery phase, we aim to understand the experiences and perspectives of people, and really understand at a broad level what are the challenges, or what is the context of the problem that we're trying to solve here. And through that, we'll generate insights. Insights are things that we might not have known before, that are surprising, sort of results from your research that are new and surprising, that actually lead us to opportunities for improvement. We take those opportunities and insights into the 3rd stage here, which is generating ideas. So we respond to those opportunities with ideas of how we might solve the problem. And this is quite a creative stage. It's important to make sure you've got the right people in the room for this, so that you are getting ideas that are maybe new and different. But if your insights are strong enough and resilient enough, you'll find that actually the ideas can be quite obvious once the insights have been defined properly. With these ideas, the notion here, and again, this comes back. This will we'll talk about this in a design thinking mindset, but we want to experiment with those ideas. So until we actually take them out and try prototype them, test them with the people who will be affected by them, we don't know if they're going to work, and that's actually a big risk. So the fourth stage there is prototyping. So prototyping is creating a inexpensive and rapid test of your idea. So it's actually trickier than you might think to take an idea that you've sort of just spoken about and the next day take it out into a community and test it as quickly and cheaply as you can. It's tricky, but not impossible. And I guess it's an extension of your research, you could think of. You'll learn a lot through prototyping. You'll learn what works and what doesn't work with your ideas. And from that, you can go back to your idea generation and refine your ideas and strengthen them. And the idea here is that you might go through this loop multiple times if your timeframes and budget allow for it. And each time you go through this loop, you're actually reducing the risk of your final solution. So it's a really big advantage of this approach is that by testing ideas and refining them, you're actually reducing the risk that the final idea you bring into a community or the final idea that you implement, you reduce the risk that it's not going to work, or that people will suddenly say, oh, well, you haven't thought of this, and therefore this idea is never going to work, or it's not going to be sustainable. Because you've already tested it with a series of prototypes, and you've tried to, well, ideally we've ironed out all of those bumps or issues. The final stage then is implementation and scaling of the idea, or of the final solution. And again, I think this happens in iterations. So implementation might start off in depending what your problem is. You might start off just at a community level, and based on the success there, over 6 months, a year, you might roll it out at a national level, or a district level, and in that way you can be more sure that each time you scale up the idea, you can be relatively certain that it's going to be successful. So there's a lot in this process, and I feel like I'm really rushing through it, but I think the main focus of this talk is to really show how this process fits with co-design and how it's part of a design thinking mindset. So we could go into this process for hours, but I might leave it there. Of course, happy to answer any questions about the process, but continuing on, I like to use this model to explain how the process feels when you're actually going through it as a project team. It feels, to many people who haven't done design before, who haven't gone through a human-centered design approach, it can feel quite uncomfortable because essentially you don't know what that final solution is that you're working towards. And you don't know what you're going to find out through your discovery phase. And you don't know how that's going to influence the sort of ideas you're going to come up with. And for some people, this can be quite uncertain and uncomfortable, the ambiguity. Because I guess in a more traditional problem-solving approach, you might have an idea of where you want this to end up, and your research might be more about proving that your idea will work, rather than a design approach where we're not thinking about the idea to begin with. We just want to understand the context, and from that, our idea generation will flow from there. So to start at this squiggle, you sort of go into a design approach and you think you've got a grasp on what the challenge is and sort of what the context is. But as you go into the discovery phase, the feeling is that you're uncovering more and more challenges, and that this problem is more and more complex. As you talk to more people and get their perspectives, you find that the problem is often more complex than you first thought. And that can feel like this squiggle here, where you don't really know where you're going, and it feels very uncertain. But as you sort of work through that and start to pull out, well, what's the new, important, surprising things here? What are our insights? It starts to unravel. If you can frame those insights well, it actually leads you into the idea generation phase with a bit more structure about where this might head, where this project end up. And so the and just unraveling the squiggle until you've got one or maybe more final concepts or solutions that you can be quite confident in how they're going to work, and you start to get this clarity and focus, and you end up with a final design that you can then implement and scale. So this model is I've found time and time again to be very accurate. And people who have not done a design approach before have often come back to me and said, you know what, that squiggle is exactly how I feel. Like it just feels like we're in the middle of a big mess here, and I don't know how we're going to solve this issue. But as you sort of trust in the process and work through that research and generate strong insights, it starts to unravel, and it feels good when you start to work through the complexity and come out the other side with a bit more clarity. So the reason that we use a human-centered design approach, and I think the strong advantage of a design approach is that it shifts us from a traditional mentality of we understand your problem and we've designed a solution that will fix your problem. Here you go. We've made it. You should use it. That's a very traditional way of solving a problem. And human-centered design really challenges that and flips it to, well, what's the best outcome that we can create for these people? And what's the best experience we can deliver for them? Or what's the best solution we can create for this group of people, or this community, or this society? And in doing that, in asking it in that way, you're actually not supposing or presuming what the outcome will be. You don't actually therefore know at the start of the project what the solution will be. And it's so it can be quite a tricky tricky shift in thinking. But the HCD process really, I think this is the main advantage of it, is it takes us from this more traditional mindset into a more human focused and less of an idea, less of a presumed idea or solution focus.
Hi, Rowan, I have a question.
Yeah, absolutely. Shoot.
Okay. Well, this is my question. Showing that squiggly line, the process is obviously very tricky and confusing, and not what people are used to. So, how do you keep the team? How do you keep the team motivated as you go through this or slog through maybe sometimes the process?
Yeah. So this is where, going back to that four voices model, it's really important to have the designer as a role in this process. If you have a team of people who have not done a design approach before and have not gone through this process in practice before, maybe they understand it at a theoretical level, it will be really challenging, and you will find that they can quite easily get lost or get tangled up in the complexity. Having that design voice there is so important to be the facilitator and to really guide people through the process.
Okay, thanks.
So is that having the designer is the way you avoid getting lost in there. So I'll continue on then. The next few models then are about design thinking. So to recap what I was saying before, it's the mindset that we want to adopt throughout a HCD approach. There's a lot of academic research that's been done on design thinking, and a lot has been written about it, and there's a lot of models that I could talk about here. I've just chosen a couple that I think are most relevant for a human-centered design approach. And you'll see, I think it'll become sort of clear why these two terms get mixed up so much, because they're almost you almost can't separate them. So if you're adopting a design thinking mindset, a human-centered approach becomes really your best course of action. And inversely, if you're going through a human-centered approach, if you don't adopt a design thinking mindset, you're not necessarily going to end up with a solution that'll work. So design thinking, the model I think that's most common to represent what is design thinking. It's looking at a problem through three lenses. The first lens, and we draw this as a Venn diagram because it sort of simplifies that. So if you can get in the middle of these three lenses or where they all overlap, you're going to be really considering a problem quite broadly and thoroughly. So to start with, we ask what is desirable, and this is from the user perspective or from the stakeholders' perspective. And this is why a human-centered approach works so well, because we want to understand what is desirable, or what is a desirable solution for the people that are involved in this challenge. So therefore, focusing on the human elements is really relevant. So when we ask what is desirable, we can think about things like preferences or beliefs, behaviors, attitudes, perspectives. There's a whole lot of things we can think about here that come into the desirability of a solution that we might be coming up with, or when we think about what is desirable for these people, or for this stakeholder group. The second lens then is what is actually possible, and this is from a technology point of view. So when I say technology, I sort of mean like, well, if we say a traditional product design project, like, can we actually make this product? Is it technologically feasible? We're not just proposing that, well, we can solve this person's problem by inventing a teleporter that gets them from A to B faster than a car does. That might be what's desirable, but is it possible? Maybe not yet in this, given our current circumstances. When we ask what is possible, we're thinking about things like, is it grounded in competencies or reality? Is it actually is it possible in our current context? And I guess there's a caveat here that we don't want to be restricted by this. We do want to be thinking broadly. We don't want to be limited to, oh, well, that's not going to work because this policy says that you can't do that. That's not constructive. I think yes, it is still possible. It's still technologically possible, but there's maybe some other constraints that we need to work with before we can actually implement it. Is it sustainable? And that might be from a environment point of view, for example. Is the solution that we're talking about going to have longevity? Will we be able to continue producing this product or providing this service into the future? And then I think the ethical point there is interesting as well. So, is this actually possible given the culture that we're working within, and and the environmental, the contextual constraints. And the third one, what is viable, and I like to think of this as sort of what is viable from a business sense. So, is this going to make sense for the organization that's implementing it, or the government that's going to be involved in implementing it? It might be a solution that's desirable by the community. It's technologically possible. We have the technology that'll allow it to happen. But in terms of the government agency that has to ultimately implement it, is it viable for them? Are they going to be able to contribute, I don't know, 10 people from their workforce for full time to implement this solution? Is it, and in for example a private sector context, is this actually going to be sustainable from a business sense? Is this going to make a profit, or is it going to sustain the business as we go into the future? So what is practical, cost-effective, and sustainable from that sort of business perspective? So when we think of these three lenses, really it's the human lens, the technology lens, and the business lens. And if we can consider each of those through our design approach, it's going to help us be sure that our final solutions are, desirable for people, possible in terms of the technology, and then ultimately viable and sustainable. The next, then probably the last model I think that I'm talking about, and I did touch on this before. Design thinking is ultimately about divergence and convergence, and this actually maps quite well again to the human-centered design approach. So as we start a project, we research, and obviously we don't assume what the solution is, and by doing that, we're actually diverging. We're exploring all of the context of a problem, and in doing that, you might be turning over stones that you might not have initially thought about, or thought that were relevant to your project, and that can be okay. If you understand the context well enough, it's going to help you when it comes to creating or defining your insights and developing ideas that will help people. That sense of divergence is really strong through the discovery phase, where you're doing that research. Then once we start to identify our ideas and we get to the stage of the sort of loop of testing and refining, we start to converge, and often that means getting or killing ideas, which can be difficult if you've invested a lot of time into coming up with an idea that you think responds to your research findings. It can be quite hard to then realize or acknowledge that actually this idea is not going to work based on this testing we've been doing. It's not going to work with the people we're testing with. And in doing that, by sort of refining your ideas, maybe combining them or culling some ideas, you're converging to a final solution, final concept or intervention that can then be implemented. So a really interesting thing about this divergence and convergence model is that you might actually go through, so we call this the design diamond, you might actually go through several design diamonds in a project. You might find that you've converged onto an idea, but then actually you need to go and explore that idea further. You need to understand the context surrounding how it might be implemented further, for example. And that actually involves diverging again. So you might go through a whole nother process of diverging and converging. Even within this diamond, I haven't shown it here, but you might actually even go through mini diamonds within this, where you go down one rabbit hole and really explore one facet of a problem to converge on an insight that summarizes that succinctly. You might diverge again when you start to come up with lots of ideas. How can we solve this problem through as many ways as possible? And then converge once you start to refine them. I think the design diamond here is quite a good way, again, of explaining how it feels when you're going through a project. It's sort of a constant process of exploring and making decisions and converging onto a finding or an idea or an insight. And this happens over and over again throughout a project. And then I think this is actually my final slide. And I guess I just wanted to share some core principles of design thinking, and again, you'll see how this really relates to, well, why it relates so closely to co-design and human-centered design. So design thinking requires a shared intent, and I've actually used, even here, I've said HCD requires us to collaboratively define. And it's you can see that it's very closely, there's a lot of overlap here. But design thinking really requires us to have that shared understanding of what is the scope of our project and how we're going to achieve this project. It's designing the whole change. So it's when you're thinking about what is desirable, what is possible, and what is viable, you're actually thinking about the whole system of a context, of a problem, a challenge, and design thinking is really by considering all of those facets or through all of those lenses, you're ultimately trying to design a solution that's going to be relevant across a system. So I guess what I'm trying to say is it's not designing a solution in isolation of everything else that's going on in a country or in a community. It's really understanding the broader context and designing within that broader context. User research. So design thinking is inherently based on that understanding, that deep understanding of people that are involved in the challenge. Visualization, and I think I could probably reframe this principle to be creativity. So design is inherently as much an art as it is a science. So while there is these models and processes that I can discuss and give this theory, present this theory, there is an art in design. It is a creative mindset and approach. And that involves things like visualization. So being quite visual in the way that we explain our ideas. It's quite tangible in the way that we would prototype our ideas and make tangible things that we can actually take out into a community and test with people. And that sort of thing. It's very much a creative approach and mindset. It's a team approach. So, I can go through a design thinking approach. I can undertake a design thinking mentality and go through a human-centered design approach by myself. But that's therefore really missing a lot of the richness that will come from understanding your your context deeply. And that's why co-design fits in so well with this, because it does bring in those perspectives. It does require you to have a team of diverse perspectives. And then finally, it's the viable, desirable, and possible. So design thinking is really seeking that intersection of those three lenses, and constantly coming back to those three lenses and making sure that you are meeting the requirements of each of those lenses as well. So that's the design thinking principles there. I've really talked a lot over the last half hour. I'd be really happy to answer any questions if there are any, or just have a bit of a discussion.
The only question that's I'm sure people will be looking at this presentation as the day goes on in the US or whatever. So you'll get questions later. So I'm sure, I know that you'll be checking in maybe tomorrow, or it's probably too late for you for today. But the only question you might want to answer, and you might want to do this offline, is to offer some good learning resources for co-design and design thinking and HCD.
Yeah.
And we have our trending topic, which is aligned with this presentation. So there are some resources there. But if you feel good about adding more, we'd love to have them.
Yeah, so I can definitely share some things. I think probably offline would be better. I'll share some links.
Okay.
Like I said, there's been a lot written. There's a lot of academic research written about design thinking, particularly, and human-centered design. And yeah, there's a lot of content out there. I think one thing I'll just add though is that it's very easy to fall into a trap where, because it's a very participatory approach, it's easy to fall into thinking that that anyone can successfully do a design approach. So I think it's true. Yes, anyone can undertake a design approach and follow it through. I think that's definitely true. But I think it's some groups often fall into the trap that it's of thinking that it's that it is sort of simple, or as simple as following the process, and therefore you'll end up with an innovative result. This is it's a profession, right? It's something that people go to university to study, and it does require practice and actually going through experiencing a process firsthand to really know how it happens. It's hard to really it would be very hard to teach a design approach if you hadn't actually gone through one yourself. So yeah, I think that's just my caution there. I think there's lots of really great materials and resources out there, but just be cautious of then thinking that it's as simple as following the process and going step by step. Yeah, be cautious of thinking that it's something that's super easy that everyone can create a successful outcome from, because it is ultimately a profession.
Good point. Very good point. Okay, I think we're going to close. And I want to thank you, Rowan, for taking the time in the lobby of the hotel.
Yeah, I think hopefully it's been hopefully you've been able to hear me well enough, and it hasn't been too much background noise.
That's been great. It's been really perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Susan, and thanks for having me.
Thanks to everyone for listening, and we can continue the discussion online on the discussion page. Take care. Bye, Rowan.
Great. Bye.